Might help if I click on the right Zoom link.
I've done that a couple times too. Just like, where
Yeah.
is everybody?
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Howdy.
I asked Slack I asked ChatGPT the question, because I'm working on data flow and control flow analysis, and I'm like, can interprocedural control flow analysis and data flow analysis be performed against Java project by only visiting each file once? And ChatGPT came back with a very interesting answer. And now I'm like, you're like, I have a question. Google's not coming back with the right, anything meaningful, and or there's long like articles written by scientists in math terms that you can't understand. Like maybe ChatGPT can just like condense this down into a more readable format. So, yeah.
Did it work?
Yes, it came up with something. It came up with something that is plausible. Now,
Okay.
you can't, right? It's like, great, like
Like,
it's plausible.
now how do I
but, like,
fact check this?
Yeah, how do I fact check this, right? Because yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the fun thing with GPT, right? Is it gives you plausible sounding answers, and then it's up to you to figure out if you believe it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me, I was using it to generate some code the other day, and it generated some really nice looking Ruby with libraries that didn't exist. It's like, yeah, this would be great if that actually like worked.
Yeah, yeah. Assume this works. Yeah. Alrighty then. Olga will be joining us shortly, but their customer meeting is running late. I am going to slap the. Ooh, I have not yet created the chunk of. Wait, the APAC call is. This is the 27th. Okay, that's the next day. Okay, I need to copy the previous SIG meeting. Autofix SIG. Bring that up here, put it under the APAC call. Wait, Crow, am I butchering the notes?
I'm sorry, what?
Am I butchering the notes? I might be. It's okay.
I don't know. I'll take a look.
Okay, I'm hoping to not butcher the notes. Thank you for being here, Crow. I know you've been busy and stuff. All right, let me make this all. All right, y'all could fill in your names for the autofix SIG. That would be greatly appreciated because every name brings us closer to being a real SIG instead of just a fake SIG. And actually also the more organizations that have shown up here. So I will post the notes in the chat. There we go.
Is the date supposed to be 26
Yeah,
instead of 12?
please, please feel free to fix my copy paste. Thank you. Okay. Let's start out with any new friends we have for today. Do you have any new friends? Anybody who hasn't been here before? Anybody want to introduce themselves? Anyone who want to say hi for the first time? Okay. We might have Jonathan joining us shortly. But I don't know if it'll either be Olga or Jonathan, so we'll see. Jonathan, if Jonathan joins, it's Jonathan Schneider. He's the CEO of Modern. See if I can. Manoir usually shows up at these too. Well, he hasn't recently. I'm just giving it a ping. Okay. All right, there are two people that have added their attendance to the meeting notes, and there are 5 people. There are 7 people in this call. So,
I'm ordering DoorDash. I'm so hungry that needs to take precedence.
all right,
All right, I'm
please
good
do
now.
mark your attendance in here. It would be greatly appreciated. Crow, I got you. Okay,
Thanks, man.
so, all right. Who wants to help us out in Scribe today?
I will scribe today.
Thank you. All right, and then opens, and then meeting agenda. Or meeting notes. Do we have any opens? Anything that anybody wants to bring up, discuss, yada, yada, yada?
Talk about disclosure check.
What? Talking about disclosures?
Disclosure check, the tool.
Oh, yeah. Do you wanna do a, the disclosure check is the thing that you wrote. Can you, do not just talk about it, but can you show a demo of it?
I can do a demo. If we talk about something else for like 2 minutes, I'll have a demo ready.
Perfect.
Like I can talk about it, but then I can't type and talk about different things.
Yeah, I get it. So yeah, that'd be awesome if you could, yeah. And order your DoorDash.
Already done.
Great. Okay, so we'll do that. Yesterday's meeting, no, 2 weeks ago's meeting. Oh, before I get there, I guess another open. We are currently close to having the Open Source Security Foundation Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group. What's it called? The outgoing vulnerability disclosure policy completed. It's been run by legal. I'm having a meeting with LF's legal again, or I'm meeting with Mike Dolan tomorrow to discuss that document. That is, I will send a link to that into the chat. .com. This one. This is not entirely related to this specification that we've been working on, but it's slightly related. This is the higher level document that describes how any researcher representing the Open Source Security Foundation or any working group representing the Open Source Security Foundation. Is it Outpound? Oh, I'll fix the title. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Yes. How any researcher, any organization, can report things outbound from the Open Source Security Foundation. So that's that document. It sets a couple of guidelines that we were thinking about operating the Autofix specification under. In particular, the one that was kind of just some dates. There's this expectation here that if we don't receive any engagement from the project affirming their intention to fix the vulnerability within 35 days, the Open Source Security Foundation reserves the right to fully publicly disclose that vulnerability at that point. There was a thought that same deadline of 35 days could also be incorporated into the process for Autofix. So if you ask the maintainer to open or enable PVR on their repository and they respond or they don't respond for 35 days on that issue, that there may be the possibility of going public at that point. And then also if you do open a PVR and the maintainer doesn't respond or doesn't react within 35 days after you've opened the advisory, you could theoretically go public at that point or just create a public pull request at that point, because clearly the maintainers are asleep at the wheel. The discussion that we've been having with Michael and myself is there's been a discussion with Alpha Omega regarding an engagement with Tidelift potentially, where the work that we're doing where we're bulk generating pull requests there may be cases in which Tidelift may pick up the slack around manual disclosure at points. The problem is that may be possible for the Open Source Security Foundation, but I don't, and Alpha Omega, but I don't want to put that as a requirement for all consumers of this specification, right? Because there may be an agreement that Alpha Omega has with Tidelift that we're paying the money for that, maybe potentially, and that's not something that's possible for everybody to take advantage of.
I mean, at the end of the day, though, the action is the same, whether or not Tidelift does it or we do it, or a third-party organization or an individual does it. I think it's still contact the maintainer, like do the normal the normal private disclosure dance. The fact that we might, without committing anything, we might be in a position to pay a third party to handle the last mile, may be more efficient for us to do it, but the same work gets done regardless of who. And I think if, from this perspective, keeping it at the what, not the who, makes it applicable to both scenarios, I think.
Sorry, like saying that they must engage with private disclosure if possible, not necessarily defining who that is.
Correct.
Yeah, but the point of this whole engagement and this whole work is like scaling. I mean, great, AO has more resources, but scaling others as well in the research field to deploy their fixes at scale. And I don't want to put something prohibitive in this specification that makes it that you must have resources beyond potentially what one individual could do in order to be complicit with this spec. Like we could, as Alpha Omega, we can go above and beyond.
Yeah. But I think it would now be a good time to show the demo, because I think that'll come back exactly
go
to
for it.
the point
Go
of,
for
like,
it.
what could an individual do.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, I'm assuming you can see my thing. So disclosure check is just a it's a Python script. What it does is it goes out. So given a package URL, it'll go out to the in this case PyPy or NPM or wherever else. It will look through libraries IO. It'll, if there's a backend GitHub project, it'll go there, and it will essentially look for the best place to disclose vulnerabilities. In this case, for Django, those are the best ones that it came up with, and it tries to give a score of how confident it is. For one like LeftPad, I think there should be a couple email addresses here found. It does look for private vulnerability reporting being enabled on GitHub. It looks for Tidelift. So in this case for LeftPad, those are the three email addresses that, if you were to send it, those are probably the ones that you would find if you were looking through it manually. This one, Electron Forge CLI, happens to be covered under a Tidelift subscription. We look for that in a couple different ways. Private vulnerability reporting is also enabled. So, and that's the highest preference one. So what I would say is, if you are a researcher or organization or whatever, and this was one of the things that you found something in, then you could use this and know, hey, I should just go here to report it. output is JSON as well, so you can script that. There's definitely bugs. Not every ecosystem is covered as well as every other one, but conceptually, does this feel like it would be helpful in this?
I definitely think it would be helpful for me. I mean, like I'm looking at this like not as an automator. Like this is very useful just for security research, like in general. I think that one of the things that would be one of the things that would be helpful, like I'm looking at the preferred contact for the Django Software Foundation, right? Like that one. That line, I would appreciate a why are you proposing this? Because, like, for example, the Django Software Foundation, are you just looking at that, like, is that inside of a security.md file? Or are you seeing that like somewhere in the contributors list and like that's where it's coming from? Like a bit more of a rationale would be appreciated.
I think I collect that. So here, so the email address was found in the PyPy registry under the author field, and the link to the security was found in the .github security MD. So that's why. Now we could obviously make that better, but that's
wouldn't for a security disclosure, wouldn't the priority of the one in the security.md come as a higher priority than the one that's in the Pi registry?
The problem that I have is so I'm parsing Markdown. Markdown could have like the text could be whatever you do not report to like this URL, because it could be a URL. It could be the author's homepage. It could be, hey, this picture of my dog. So that's why it's lower. I figure that the PyPy registry is definitely going to contact somebody on the project. But you're right. If I felt more confident with the parsing of the Markdown, maybe if there's only one email address or only one URL, that's a higher confidence. Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was like also thinking about like sentiment analysis of the file. Like, what is the sentiment behind this? Is this like a do not or a yeah. I think that like this is super cool. I think this is something that like I bet you SNCC, like the research lab there, GitHub security lab, like this is totally something they would want to use. I would throw together suggest throwing together a what's it called, the ASCII cinema demo, and it just saying, hey, there's this thing, great, hey, there's this thing, here's a video demo with ASCII cinema, that would actually get people using it.
Okay, that I can totally do that. And obviously getting it installable from PyPy, so you can just pip install foo. It's slightly easier right now, but it's just on the GitHub. I do want to get it moved over to OpenSSF. That's a separate thing, but
does it also support just a regular GitHub repository URL?
Yeah. So
okay, well, still has the package handle. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think this one is, and it's also awkward because like libraries.io support some things. They call it Ruby gems, not gem. Like there's, it's not perfect. This one's interesting because I do test it on this one, and this one, as far as I know, I couldn't find a programmatic way of getting this, but I want these as bugs so that we can like manually find the right author and then like implement the check to retrieve that.
Josh had one that he wanted you to do in the chat.
Sorry, I'm Zoom window.
Ruby gems /sorcery, that package. That's Ruby gems /sorcery.
Sorcery, like that?
Yeah. Thanks for indulging me.
Yeah.
Womp womp.
Yeah. No. So this is to GitHub. You know what? Let's do this as a. I mean, I don't have to right now, but so Ruby gems.
Because you'd probably have to do some smart parsing of the README to find it.
Which would be, I mean, yeah, but, okay, so sorcery is the, let me see if,
And we don't have to go down this rabbit hole if we
yeah,
have other topics.
rabbit holes are great. Sorcery. I'm wondering if. No. There is this, okay, so there is a security MD file here.
There is.
Oh, okay, so this is a good example. The security MD file for this says, email the current maintainers with the description of the vulnerability. You should expect a response in 48 hours, blah, 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 blah. A list of current maintainers can be found on the README under the contacts section. So then I would have to go to, okay, so there's actually no reason why I shouldn't be able to also load the README and look at, I mean, here it's like current maintainers and there's a bullet list. Yeah, it should be fine. I'll pull that bug. Ruby gem sorcery.
It's also a great way for me to find out my documentation is outdated.
Very cool.
I mean, to be fair though, the hard part, so it's like, as if I start parsing general README files, I'm going to get a lot of email addresses that have nothing to do with the project and being like semantically saying like, this is a current maintainer, or is it a current author, or is it currently maintained by, and not like, I want to be
Lots of edge cases. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, all we can do is like, we find some stuff that it doesn't work well on, we make it work well on it, and we just rinse and repeat. So cool. If you find any other bugs, just dump them into the issues in the repo, and I'll just kind of one by one, make it suck less.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Anybody else? Any other comments before we move on?
Just a few on the chat, but nice work, Michael.
Yeah,
From Chrome.
absolutely. Cool beans. Hang on 1 second. Okay, so we on to the next topic. There is now an API for opening private vulnerability reports via GitHub. I can pull up this there was an announcement about this earlier. There we go. Is there an API? I'm just gonna, okay, here we go. So I'm gonna screen share real fast. So there's now an API down here. Create a, no, it's not, yeah, privately reported security vulnerability. This one. So this is an API that GitHub has added that will attempt to open a private vulnerability report via GitHub. I'm working on the pod GitHub bindings for this. They've actually been finished, but their pod GitHub has, the maintainers seem not there. So I might actually become a maintainer of that project because I use it. We'll see. But anyways, yes, and then
Can
you can also
share the link?
yes.
Can you share the link? Thank you.
Yes. Let me actually link to the here. But yes, it does work. I have used it. And then you can also get security advisors that you've opened. So as a researcher, you can use this get endpoint to view any open PVRs that you've created, which is also very nice. Or well, that you have access to. There is also a draft endpoint that is being created by we're Alpha Omega. We're currently in a discussion with GitHub regarding the feature that we need to allow us to open forks via the API. So currently this only lets you create a private vulnerability report. It does not let you also open a private fork and push changes to it. And so in order to fully go through the process of reporting the vulnerability privately and creating the fix, we also need the ability to create the private fork too and push the changes there. There is also a discussion with GitHub around currently that fork name. So when you go through the process, let me do this real fast. Let me screen share again. GitHub.com. So, right, this is, I'm not logged in here. Give me a second. I need the other, need my, there we go. Screen share this again. There we go. Okay. So, for those of you that have not done GitHub Security Advisories before, you go to advisories, and this is all me testing to create advisories. But if you, so what we're trying to do at this point is the API will let you, as a researcher, draft a new advisory, set a title. And then create this draft security advisory, other /A. And then the problem here is that creating a private fork, this is an API that needs to be added via, like currently you can click it, but then what ends up happening is this creates a repository or creates a new branch with this custom name with a unique UID. Now, Manoir, I presume that when you bulk pull request generate to fix security vulnerabilities, do you rebase those changes on a regular basis, or is it a one and done?
So, Jonathan, I'm actually traveling by BART right now. It's really not the right. So I'm just listening. But can you repeat the question one more time?
When you generate security fixes, do you ever rebase those changes, or is it only a one and done?
It's sometimes like there's so we have only submitted what, like 50 something security. In I think in those cases there's only like 3 of them where they asked for a change in the one that we originally submitted, suggested something, and then we had to do that again. But yeah, so that's like less than 10% of the cases.
So the goal with our work is to, thank you, I appreciate that. That's helpful. The goal with our work is to not just generate the pull request once, but also rebase the change regularly, so that if the maintainer is like non-responsive, or like they take a little while, like we can keep it up to date with whatever the main branch is, and regenerate the fix, right? The problem is that because this name is uniquely generated, there's a problem around storage and like knowing like this campaign maps to this GHS ID for this repository. And so we're working with GitHub to hopefully be able to get this name of this private fork to be something that you can configure to be something predictable, so that so that you can run automation against it and like be like run it, and like this will be the naming convention for all these forks, and like any tooling that's generating pull request, like the thing that's generating the pull requests can then be separated from the thing that is automating the creation of the GHSA. Is that making sense, or have I lost people?
Seems sane to me.
Okay. So that's just another thing that's being worked on right now. And
There's just two quick comments. One is that it does take a long time, so that the fixes will need to stay for a while before it gets eventually merged. So in the worst that we have seen is like 4 months. But the other thing is the practicality of it, as in if the code base, like just that part of the code base, the change can happen, but it's also unlikely. So just maybe the practical thing would be not to worry too much about it. That's just my 2 cents. That it will just be no problem in rebasing it. It's just not going to be a big deal, because only it's going to be a problem. The margin issue is going to only come in if that part of the code somehow changed, and therefore suddenly your fix is not matching to the original one anymore. But that's, I would say, a percentage of the case, low percentage, as opposed to the thing. Sorry, that's yeah.
we also like to keep it up to date so that, like, if, for example, at the time when it was built or the contribution was made, like the main branch was failing, right? They can, if we keep it rebased, then they can always run the latest changes, and hopefully at a future point when we rebase it, it will be at a point where the branch is safe or clean or whatever, and so they can run the checks that they want to normally run, right? Because the fork point is always going to be from whatever main or head was at the time when the pull request was generated. And so being able to regenerate it at a later point is useful. Okay. So we were thanks, Josh. We were going through, is there any other opens or points that anybody else wants to make before we dive back into the this document that we were working through? Bueller? All right, cool. So Mike Dolan has been through this document once. I think that there's some misunderstanding from, I've read through some of Mike's comments, and I think there's some misunderstanding about the intention of this document. So I'm going to work through that with him on tomorrow. But let's just go through what he's requested here quickly, and just through the comments that are open on this document. In these cases, the scope of the private vulnerability is often beyond what can be reasonably reported to each maintainer privately in a one-on-one exchange manually. Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Simply automating the creation of thousands of bug reports, it also isn't useful. Okay. Then Xavier said, I suggest to add this doc. I suggest to add this doc preamble saying what to attempt before doing public disclosure via mass PR. For example, private disclosure when the API is available, a PR that adds detection to the project CI, for example, adding a detection via CodeQL or SemGrep or GitHub code scanning that will alert the maintainers privately about the issue. So this document is intended to private vulnerability disclosure via the API is within the scope of this document.
I think if you look at the date on when that got added to is before some of our discussions around the private disclosure.
All right, Josh, you came back. Reading this, there are 2 ways to interpret what the issue is. There are a wide variety of reporting mechanisms that are inconsistent and difficult to automate due to the variety of methods and being uncertain which a particular project uses. A Michael Scovetta. B, the mechanisms currently exist are limited when it comes to private disclosure, automating private disclosure. I think that the answer is both. And is this unclear and we should more clearly articulate that those are both problems here? Or yeah, I guess Josh, can you speak more to that?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. They're both considerations, and it might be worth making that a little bit more direct. Although I also wrote this like a couple weeks ago, so trying to see if it's still relevant. Further, that's often impractical to. Yeah. So it looks like it was based off of this first part. So it's impractical to privately report, both because there's technical limitations doing it at scale with automation, and then also because the preferences of projects is not necessarily easy to, which yes, Govetta's project helps with this, know what they actually prefer.
Right, but yes, it's like, and one of the things I've said is like HackerOne and BugCrowd. Well, the other thing with HackerOne and BugCrowd, for example, right, is that they may have policies that are inconsistent with a vulnerability, like open source security research disclosure, right? Because a lot of vendors will have their bug bounty program on HackerOne and BugCrowd, but then they'll just say, oh, and now our open source is in scope, but they'll have a policy that explicitly states that, hey, you can't disclose this vulnerability without, approval from the project or whatever, or like some bug bounty term that is not applicable to open source, but they just kind of threw it under the existing thing because it made sense and it was easier than running two programs. And now you can't submit to that program because you need to disclose because it's a vulnerability in an open source project that ships to downstream consumers.
So I guess another way to frame this would be, so these are both problems. How do we want to address that with this policy? I think some of the discussions previously when it comes to the automations is basically if it's available, use it. If it's not, it's kind of up to the campaign developer to figure out what they want to do there. Am I remembering that accurately?
Yeah, they're like, I think we can put some like may or shoulds in there to encourage specific behaviors, but if there is no easy way to disclose, giving ultimately the decision-making process to the campaign operator is the right way to, yes, I think I agree with your assessment there.
Gotcha. So that one, I think we've more or less covered with how we phrased that section. Maybe we can touch that up a bit. Do
Sure.
we cover the other issue of what to do with all the different ways to contact, and what if they're not compatible with how we want to do the disclosures?
Well, Michael, I got a question for you. What do you want to do if, Michael, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. What do you want to do? I think we discussed this maybe last week, but I don't remember the answer, and maybe we should put this in here. What do you want us to do if they say, hey, disclose via HackerOne or BugCrowd or disclose via whatever, and this is our policy, and that policy is inconsistent with a open source security researcher trying to fix a vulnerability that needs to get publicly disclosed?
I think we just off the top of my head here, I think we should take a principled stance that because open source, because the project is intended to be used by others, that open source maintainers, if they are pressured into essentially accepting a gag order in order to disclose through HackerOne, that the maintainer should politely say, no, either give me another mechanism, please give me another mechanism. You now have 89 days. That kind of thing, where it could eventually lead to full disclosure after 90 days because the maintainer is only willing to accept things with onerous conditions on the researcher. For example, if my policy was, I will accept reports from security researchers, just mail me a check for $1,000 with the report and I'll take a look at it. Like, that's not a reasonable policy for me as a maintainer to have. I also think that for an open source project, any kind of signing and signing away your rights as a researcher as part of the disclosure process is not reasonable. I don't think maintainers should feel that they have to use that as the only disclosure mechanism. So they can just say, nope, we're going to do it this other way. I get it why like when there's a bug bounty attached to it, that part of what, that there is kind of an exchange of things. But if it's just purely a disclosure thing, I don't think there's any good rationale for why a researcher should feel bound to that.
How do we encode that in policy or in a specification like this?
My first thought would be defining what is reasonable as far as those policies on the maintainer side, and then defining what you do when you encounter something that's unreasonable.
Yeah, my like stupid simple solution to this problem was, hey, enable PVR. All right, you're not going to enable PVR. Fine, we'll just open a public pull request. Right? Like that's the like simplest solution to this. But Michael's not a fan of that plan. But like, truly that's the like lowest sort of, it's the lowest sort of like common denominator where you by submitting via PVR, you're not agreeing to anything, hopefully. And right, like, and you can also automate it.
Would it make sense to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, your turn.
Would it make sense to use the same approach that we did with the automated PVRs, where if it's not available, it's up to the campaign operator to do it, make the decision there? So use the should and may language.
Right, like, if the maintainer does not enable PVR after 35 days, you may open a public pull request at that point.
Yeah, so something similar where if a maintainer only provides HackerOne or BugCrowd or some unreasonable disclosure method, and they don't offer an alternative after 35 days. I don't know, just kind of spitballing some ideas there.
So the problem here is they won't enable a private vulnerability disclosure, and they want us to use as a researcher. They want us to use HackerOne or one of the other bug bounties. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, and I think to generalize.
There's a BugCrowd or HackerOne, or there's some, and in my experience, most of those usually include a gag policy of some kind, even if it's like, just in my experience, if you read through most BugCrowd HackerOne disclosure policies, they usually have some sort of gag requirement for, some undeterminate period of time that may be infinite, or maybe until they give you explicit permission. And very often is not like to a set deadline.
Right, and then as a researcher, you just technically have that vulnerability constantly open because you're not doing anything with it.
Correct, because and the risk there is if you violate the terms of that disclosure, you can receive a ban from HackerOne or BugCrowd, which means that you're no longer able to receive any sort of financial gains from the platform at all. So like,
okay,
this is a problem with the single platform, but you're actually exposing yourself to future risk of not being able to achieve any sort of financial gains from any of your research in the future.
There's actually a really good point. So I while you were talking, I was looking for is this really a thing? And the first one that I came across was Spotify's HackerOne, and at the bottom it says HackerOne's abide by the following Spotify disclosure guidelines. Unless Spotify gives you permission, do not disclose any issues to the public or to any third party. Yes, and those are very common on HackerOne and BugCrowd. It's not like they're exclusive to those platforms, but they're very common.
So the two big concerns it sounds like is being stuck between either not being able to disclose the vulnerability to the public after a certain amount of time, or presenting yourself to some sort of risk if you do.
Correct.
So violating those contracts or some other risk.
Yes.
Hmm.
So that might be a way to generalize it.
I have gotten very pedantic about this, not because I'm pedantic, but because I've have real world experience with these problems. Like
I mean,
HackerOne and Bugcrowd's triagers will get pissed at you if you say, hey, I'm going to disclose this because it needs to be disclosed. They will throw the you agree to this when you submitted this at you. Like like it's not something that they don't do. They actually, like, I've received those messages saying, hey, you're violating the terms of the disclosure of this program's policy.
I mean, we could simply, warning to security researchers. If a project's disclosure mechanism is HackerOne, or we don't even need to call it HackerOne. If it is a, be careful of the terms that you would agree to when submitting through a formal program. If that's the case, you may want to consider alternative disclosure mechanisms to get the message to the team without agreeing to such things. And that way it's on the researcher to decide. And from an AO perspective, we may just feel that, we won't participate in, HackerOne bug bounties as a result, or I don't know, something to get us out of it. But maybe just a warning that there are restrictions here if you disclose in certain ways.
Right. And so that has, like, that's in the disclosure, that's in the finder's guide for the vulnerability disclosure working group. Like, the guide that we published under the vulnerability disclosure group working group has that language in it, which is great. But when you're trying to automate disclosure,
I
right,
agree.
you can't parse HackerOne's disclosure right? Like, at that point, if you're expecting to automate this stuff, like, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that someone will go through the process of manually disclosing to every single one of these organizations HackerOnes. Which is why the fallback is PVR, or that's why my proposed solution here is PVR or public pull request. Right? It's you're not exposing yourself to risk, and the maintainer could have reduced this if they were to be willing to engage in PVR.
Well, even if they do under PVR, nothing obligates the maintainer to ever make that public.
Correct, but we have you can have your own disclosure policy, and you're not agreeing to some terms of agreement. And and GitHub doesn't operate as, I mean, GitHub has made a very strong point in the sand that they are not going to operate as an arbiter between researchers and maintainers, right? And with GitHub and HackerOne, you have a lot of arbiters that exist between researchers and hackers, or sorry, researchers and maintainers, that will also use the threat of kicking you off the platform.
Yeah.
So maybe we get something in here just so we can capture the conversation, and then we can refine it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I'm just not sure where we would want to put that.
I mean, it would be nice. So since HackerOne's a OpenSSF member, it would be nice to, like, because I think this is indicative of a.
They can't do anything. The policies are set by their customers. HackerOne is.
But if they had a structured data, if they had a field that you could query reliably to say, disclosure policy is like, 90 days public, gag forever, or something like something so that you're not actually parsing the text. It may be easier to then say, don't report to projects that have through HackerOne to projects that have this type of disclosure policy.
But also, I don't think that they have an automated way of actually reporting these things.
No.
I don't think there's an API for hackers. There's an API for receivers, like if you're a manager. But I don't believe that HackerOne has an API for reporting vulnerabilities.
Sorry. And I missed this email, but last week, Kayla reached out to me that they do have API capabilities for submitting vulnerability reports to the HackerOne platform. How about this? Since a lot of this is HackerOne, let's loop in Kayla. Let's have the conversation there, because if there's something we can do, we should try it. I think the general warning, though, here, which would apply to any reporting platform, is that you as a security researcher may be asked to give up some of your rights when submitting a vulnerability through a platform. Beware of what you're giving up, and if you don't feel comfortable, feel free to, you should think about submitting a different way, even if that means not being able to partake in a bug bounty or whatever. And that way it's for the researcher to decide where they want to go, rather than us like trying to account for all these variations.
Maybe one way to fit that in, I'm not sold on the wording, but a section on gag orders or request to not disclose. Because that seems to be the general gist of the problem is, hey, for whatever reason, if you can't disclose this, how do you get around that issue?
I guess, so they do have it, okay, bulk create hacker asset submissions. This API endpoint used to submit assets to a specific program on HackerOne platform. When this request is successful, the API will, okay, that's assets though. I don't know what an asset enrichment report is. Okay. I was considering putting this information like, okay, so we have this down here that's like kind of starting to replace this. Private disclosure, the open source software hosting provider supports a pragmatic means of private reporting, for example, GitHub private reporting, then this must be used to report the vulnerability. If the pragmatic means of private reporting is not enabled on the vulnerability repository, then a public issue requesting the private reporting feature be enabled on the repository on the organization must be requested. The vulnerability itself must not be disclosed, but the existence of vulnerability should be disclosed. Your campaign should consider how to minimize the notification load on maintainers across the projects and should consider non-pragmatic security policies, security.nb, for example, as a means of preferred manual private reporting. For example, as instead of opening many issues across multiple repositories within the same user or organization, that may be appropriate for a single issue to be opened, requesting a private single issue. Yeah, okay. And then
Sorry, the previous paragraph must be requested. Do we feel that should be a should?
no, it's a must. You must request them to enable PVR.
I can live with that if we just add GitHub in earlier in that sentence, so it's clear that, because I'm on GitLab, like asking me
It's right
to
here.
private vulnerability.
It's right here.
No, that's just an example.
If the open source security hosting provider supports a pragmatic.
Oh, okay. Okay, I got it. Okay, so lowercase private vulnerability. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we can give it
Okay. No, it's
a programmatic mean. No, this is actually not bad. Programmatic
Yeah.
means of private reporting. And let's just call this PMPR. If PMPR is not enabled on the repository, then a public issue requesting encrypting the if PMPR is available and available on the hosting. Yes, that makes sense. Is available from the hosting provider and not enabled on the vulnerable repository. If after 35 days of opening an issue requesting PMPR enabled. If how's that?
Well, so I think that one's too far up in the workflow. So second paragraph, agree. Okay, so that your campaign should consider how to minimize that whole paragraph. Um, I feel like it's still too full disclosure 0 day.
Man, it's May, and you can do something more than that.
No, I'm thinking your campaign must consider how to minimize notification. Well, no, they shouldn't. No, and that second should. So your campaign should consider how and must consider non-programmatic security policy, security MD, for example. And I think if all other, so
So at a high level, this is from a conversation that we had last week, which detailed basically that instead of, so let's say that you have one organization with a bunch of repositories and you're going to fix them all at the same time. Instead of asking each one of those individual repositories across github.com/Google for each one of them to enable private vulnerability reporting, you open one issue in the .github repository, which has the organization level security.md file, and ask there, please enable PVR for the entire organization instead of opening a bunch of individual issues across the entire org. Maybe that needs to get phrased better, but that's the intention. It's like open one issue instead of opening all the issues across all the repositories. stories.
Yeah, no, I'm just imagine, so I guess where my fear is still in the objection that, like, you know, as a researcher, you find vulnerabilities in 1,000 projects, you open up 1,000, you realize that none of the 1,000 have PVR enabled, so you open up public issues in each of them saying, please enable. 35 days later, you check, you see that only 50 of them have enabled it. So you submit 50 PVRs and 950 0 days. In
Yes.
public requests at that point, and you're compliant with this policy. But I think the onus is not the onus, but I think we need to do more. I think we need to try so for instance, I would be okay with, and obviously I'm biased here, but like if the disclosure check tool is useful and does this, then perhaps the answer is try PVR. If PVR doesn't work, run the disclosure tool. If you try all of those places, none of them respond, and and basically the code is the maintainer like goes non-responsive for all of those things, then yes, then maybe after 35 days.
Michael, think. Okay, okay. Let me give you a number.
Okay.
You have 10,000.
Yep.
What do you do with your triage tool at that point? Your alerting tool at that point? Do you go through all 10,000 and go through and follow each one of their processes that haven't, let's say 9,000 of those
Mhm.
have not enabled PVR?
Yep. It is crazy expensive to do this, which is why we absolutely need, which is the whole reason we're talking here, is that we need to be able to do this stuff efficiently. But in the absence of efficiency, it's still going back to the, full disclosure 0 day is a thing that we should all think of as the failure mode that is just slightly better than never disclosing it. And even if it means that we have to spend a ton of money doing manual disclosure times 10,000, I think that's better, I think. And now if we try to do manual disclosure on 10,000 and none of them respond ever to us, then at that point, it does flip, and the needs of the community outweigh the needs of the maintainer. And I think the full disclosure is appropriate there. But
I disagree with you on 2 counts. First off, most of these most open source projects across the board are somebody's one-off and don't really matter when you're looking at this scale, right? Most projects don't matter. Right? Secondly, most projects are dead.
well, then why report it at all?
I'm sure, but like I still get I have generated pull requests back in 2019 that still get merged to this day.
Mhm.
As
Right?
far as reporting stuff that's dead, it's valuable so that folks know to avoid, hey, this thing's dead and it's vulnerable. Don't use it.
Yeah, that's like having an open pull request with a security fix in it is a valuable flag to a potential user of that library.
But you'd get a CVE out of it anyway. It would
What?
just-
I don't. No, I don't try to get CVE numbers unless the maintainer actually says yes, this is a valid security vulnerability. Because again, the CVE system doesn't want to handle it at this scale.
Hmm.
So that's why we'll try to get a GHS or get a or what's Josh's thing, the Global Security
GS.
Advisory Database. Yeah, GSDI.
Yeah.
Right. But we're dealing with a scale that
Mhm.
you're still thinking small, but also assuming that everybody has money. And I think that you're trying to solve this problem assuming that there's infinite resources and infinite time, and this is the entire reason that we're having this entire conversation and this entire document is existing. Is you have to cut your losses at a certain point for a certain vulnerability, and you have to just say you're going to piss some people off, and it's going to be okay, because in the grand scheme of things, we fixed more security vulnerabilities, and some of the stuff is not even a security vulnerability, it's just a security hardening, and they're just going to merge it because they don't think it's it's not a security fix. It's just security hardenings.
If we can differentiate those two,
You can't.
and I realize that the hard part is differentiating the two, but for things that are obviously security hardening, I would count that as a bug. Like that it was not even in scope for this. And I think we could argue about whether like socket timeouts, is that like denial of service, or is that but some things will obviously fall below the line or on this side or whatever, and public pull request that all day long. That's what it's there for.
You make a trade-off between, so any tool that's going to be automated facing vulnerabilities like this is going to be doing static code analysis. And there's a trade-off that you're making with static code analysis between fixing the vulnerability because it looks vulnerable and missing false positives because you're making your static code analysis tool look for more things and narrowing it down to be more exact, right? Now, what I did for ZipSlip was I said, okay, this is a code pattern that appears, this is vulnerable. And I didn't look for data flow globally. I looked at local code bases and said, this is unzipping a file and it's not sanitizing it. Okay, that could be a jar file that's local, right? That like the project built itself, right? Like I can't make those assertions because data flow and control flow across a large code base is a Turing, it's a hard problem, and you can't guarantee correctness. But you can say that looks like a pattern of a common security vulnerability, and even if it's not, it's still a valid security hardening. So let's try to fix this at scale. Like, I also want to be clear that most of this will be thrown at vulnerabilities that are not RCEs. Probably, I mean, at least in the beginning. Now, long-term goals of this is like, let's do SQL injection. But like, again, it's a big, there's a lot of code out there, and you're dealing with the whole problem we're trying to deal with at this point is a problem of scale. I mean, like, for your point down here, like 35 days seems aggressive and you're not giving them any other warning. We could put something in there that says, like, you have to warn them again at 25 days that, hey, they've only got 10 days left.
What happens if they say, got it, but I understood, but I'm not going to enable PVR. My security policy is security at MD. Just read that. What if that is their response? What would the?
The argument that I have is, given the scale at which we are attempting to, an individual engaged in this campaign is attempting to fix a security vulnerability, the norm for the industry, just because of history, is that the receiver of the report dictates how the report comes in, right? They publish the security.md file. They publish the security.txt file, right? And because of that, the researcher has to go through the effort of trying to find where that vulnerability needs to get reported in order to follow their policy, or they have to go, like, Twitter DMs, right? Like, this is an opportunity that we have as researchers to flip that script. There is a norm, but that norm has only existed because trying to track down who to report to is a hard problem, right? In this case, we have a universally usable way that we can all disclose file, and it is PVR. And so when we are in this state, we can dictate, because of that, this is the way we would like to report to you. We are doing this at scale. If you don't want to follow that, it's fine. You're going to get a public pull request.
Yeah,
But we would prefer to use PVR.
How about this without, because now we're jumping right down to implementation. What if you could just pipe a report file to disclosure check? So you say, here's my diff, here's my markdown, here's my whatever. Send that to, all of the contacts listed in the output of this disclosure. Essentially, smush the two together, and that way it'll either send an email. Most places don't have like a website and a form, but we could deal with that. If it's PVR, then it'll do the API and do the PVR thing. If it's TideLift, it'll send it to security at TideLift where they'll get it and do the thing. If and this is getting back to like future talk, but like if we have a separate relationship with TideLift, like we could just send them all to TideLift and make it really easy for ourselves. I get that this policy is not about just us, but I think, like, honestly, I think that last, I think it's just it's gonna make everybody very unhappy. That last part.
Will this make them more unhappy? Which are you more likely to upset? That going the public disclosure route, which so far I've only pissed off a couple people at Apache, and the rest of them have not. I've not received any like negative, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, I've got a little bit of that, but like, I think the scale of the problem you see there versus spamming a bunch of people with a bunch of fixes that are most often, or not most often, sometimes security hardenings. And if you send them a patch file, they then have to go through the full process of downloading that patch file, applying it to their repository, yada yada. Like, they have to go through manual steps versus just hit a merge button, right? Like, that's, you're trying to not overwhelm maintainers that are already unpaid.
How about this? Step one, check if PVR is enabled. If it's not enabled, open up an issue, say, please enable PVR. If you enable PVR, I will submit it, at next week or in 20 days or whatever, I will submit a report of a vulnerability to you through PVR. If you don't, I'm going to look for you in other ways, and I will send you a patch file or markdown or whatever, and I will do my best that I can programmatically to get the message to you. And yes, it'll be harder for you because you will have to do weird patch things and stuff. Those are your two options. And then if I don't hear from you on either of those, then 90 days later it goes public, or 35 or whatever. Does that?
So
So PVR, then disclosure check, then 0 day.
So you're saying give them the option of open an issue. If the issue doesn't work, then
spam whatever emails we can find through disclosure check.
spam the emails. If that doesn't work, then you okay, but then you have to run an email server or be connected to an email server and monitoring responses.
No, you just have the reply all be to. I mean, the question is, do we want that to be a no reply email where, like, we're not looking for a back and forth engagement. We are doing a one-time blast out disclosure. If so, great. If not, then yes, there needs to be a reply email address. But that's kind of what we would be doing with the private vulnerability report. We would be expecting them to type in, like, what does this mean? And for us in some way to have to respond to that. So whether you respond to that through the GitHub UI or through an email UI, we're
Yeah, but you can automate like a single platform, and you're having to automate from multiple different communication channels at this point, and that's like
I think
exploding.
most are going to be email. I honestly, I think that it'll be like, there'll be a chunk that'll be PVR, and it'll grow over time. The vast majority of the rest will be email, and there'll be a handful of like oddities that maybe
Don't
we
want
just.
to write. I don't want to have anybody have to write a ticketing system, email.
No, no,
one.
no, we're not, no ticketing systems. We are way over time, but
Yeah, we are.
keep.
So so in the initial contact, you say, you have 35 days. If you don't, we will report via this mechanism, and we supply the output of your tool. And then if at 90 days they still have nothing, then you go public with a pull request.
I think so. I need to think about edge cases there, but that sounds right. Where we can defensively say that we've tried everything that we could, short of like human manually like looking through every place for an indeterminate amount of time, which I don't think we should do. So we've done commercially reasonable efforts to find and disclose privately, and if they are unresponsive, maybe if they're unresponsive completely 35 days after last contact. If they are responsive, but they disagree, they whatever, 90 days, we disclose. I think that's at least, I mean, other folks like chime in if you think that you disagree, but like I feel like that's the right. That's the right.
It's only via email, right? Is that a good line in the sand to draw? That like we will either disclose via PVR or email.
Yeah. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna run disclosure check on the top 10,000 projects. It'll take me a couple days to run them all to see statistically how many of them have at least one email address. From early testing, practically all, they either have nothing because it's a bug in the tool, or they have at least one email address. So I think with that, it should be okay.
An email should be generated to the what's the link to your, can you send the link to your tool and we'll put that in, we'll put it in the policy.
Sure. Once you call this OpenSSF disclosure check, and we'll rename it to that. Yeah, disclosure. Yeah, that works.
If after 35 days of opening an issue, requesting PVR should be enabled. If the maintainer has been completely unresponsive, at this point, an email should be generated to the contact returned by the latest version of the OpenSSF disclosure tool. Who will be emailed must be included in the issue requesting PMR.
Yep, and that way it's super clear up front.
What if the maintainer wants to change it? What if they say, actually, please email here in the response to the issue? Do we look at do we monitor those issues? And like parse them and try to, like, if they put a / command that says, you know, email to.
We could do that. That would be easy enough to parse out. If you want to define a, yeah.
Right.
If you want to change this reply, you know, copy and update this, and that way it's that I would be okay with that. I mean, it makes things a little bit more complicated on our end, but
And what we tell them they can override it by contributing to this to your repository.
yeah, or just enable PVR.
I know, but like We will be, I mean, like every time we run this thing, we run it with the latest version of your tool,
Yeah.
right? And so they just need to create a pull request within that 35 days
Mhm.
to fix where it's going or fix their infrastructure. So that
add an email address to the security MD.
yeah.
Yeah. I really have to run.
Okay.
This-
Yeah.
I really like. Please keep this going. This is really good.
Yep. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks,
You
everybody.
want to do this in a week? Oh, next.
I could do next week.
All right. Let's try to do this again next week. Okay. Cool. Thanks all.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Bye bye. Thanks.